The crystal chandelier above my in-laws' dining table cast shadows that seemed to dance with malicious intent. I watched my wife Alma fidget with her napkin, her wedding ring conspicuously absent from her finger. Again. "So, Cedric," my father-in-law Harold began, cutting into his prime rib with surgical precision, "how's the IT consulting business treating you these days?" "Can't complain," I replied, forcing a smile while internally cataloging the subtle changes in Alma's behavior over the past 3 months. The late-night phone calls she claimed were work emergencies, the sudden interest in yoga classes that ran until 10 p.m., the way she flinched whenever I touched her shoulder. Alma's sister, Vanna, sat across from me, her emerald dress hugging curves that she made sure everyone noticed. Recently divorced and bitter about it, she'd been staying with us for the past month while she figured things out. Tonight, she kept shooting meaningful glances between Alma and me, as if she knew something I didn't. "Alma tells us you've been working late quite a bit," my mother-in-law Patricia said, her voice dripping with that particular brand of passive aggression she'd perfected over decades of suburban warfare. "Not as late as some people," I said, letting my gaze linger on Alma. She shifted uncomfortably, reaching for her wineglass with a hand that trembled slightly. The conversation continued around me, but I found myself studying my wife of 18 years like she was a stranger. When had she started wearing that particular shade of lipstick? When had she begun styling her hair differently, more youthful? When had she stopped looking at me with anything resembling affection? "You know what I love about family dinners?" Vanna said suddenly, her voice cutting through the polite chatter like a blade. "All the secrets we pretend not to know about each other." The table fell silent. Harold's fork paused midway to his mouth. Patricia's eyes widened with the anticipation of drama. And Alma. Alma went pale as winter moonlight. "What secrets?" Patricia asked, leaning forward like a vulture sensing carrion. Vanna smiled, the expression sharp enough to cut glass. "Oh, the usual. Who's really working late? Who's been getting mysterious phone calls? Who's been buying new lingerie they never wear at home?" I felt something cold settle in my stomach, but I kept my expression neutral. Years of dealing with difficult clients had taught me the value of a poker face. "Vanna," Alma said, her voice strained, "maybe we should talk about something else." "Should we?" Vanna's smile widened. "I think family honesty is important, don't you, Cedric?" All eyes turned to me. I took a slow sip of wine, buying time while my mind raced. Whatever game Vanna was playing, I wasn't going to be a pawn in it. Not yet. "I think," I said carefully, "that some conversations are better had in private." "How diplomatic," Vanna laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You always were too good for her, you know that?" "Vanna," Patricia snapped, "that's quite enough." But the damage was done. The seed of suspicion that had been growing in my mind for weeks suddenly bloomed into terrible certainty. I looked at Alma, really looked at her, and saw guilt written in every line of her face. "I need some air," I said, standing abruptly. My chair scraped against the hardwood floor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. I walked out onto the back patio, my hands unsteady as I took out my phone. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the faint hint of someone's fireplace. Familiar suburban smells for a night that felt anything but ordinary. Behind me, I could hear raised voices through the sliding glass door. Alma's defensive tone, Patricia's scandalized questions, Harold trying to play peacemaker. And underneath it all, Vanna's laughter, sharp and knowing. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. "Check her laptop. Password is Eli 2005. You deserve to know the truth. V." Eli was our 17-year-old son, born in 2005. Of course, Vanna would know Alma's passwords. Sisters always shared everything, didn't they? I stared at the message for a long moment, thumb hovering over the delete button. There was still time to pretend I'd never seen it, still time to go back inside, finish dinner, drive home, and continue living in blissful ignorance. But ignorance, I was learning, wasn't actually bliss. It was just another word for cowardice. I deleted the message and slipped the phone back into my pocket, but I didn't delete what it had told me. When I returned to the dining room, the conversation had moved on to safer topics. Patricia was discussing her book club's latest selection, Harold was complaining about his golf handicap, Alma was pushing food around on her plate without eating, and Vanna was watching me with those knowing green eyes. "Feel better?" she asked as I sat down. "Much," I lied. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The rest of the dinner passed in a haze of forced normalcy. I smiled at the right moments, laughed at Harold's terrible jokes, and complimented Patricia's cooking. But all the while, my mind was elsewhere, planning. When we finally left, Alma was quiet during the drive home. Vanna sat in the back seat, humming softly to herself. Our son Eli was at a friend's house for the night, which meant the house would be empty except for the three of us. "That was awkward," Alma finally said as we pulled into our driveway. "Was it?" I asked, putting the car in park but not turning off the engine. "I thought it was illuminating." She shot me a sharp look. What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said, getting out of the car. "Just making conversation." Inside, Alma immediately headed for the stairs. "I have some work to catch up on," she said without looking back. "On a Sunday night?" I called after her. "Deadlines don't care what day it is," she replied, already halfway up the stairs. Vanna lingered in the living room, straightening cushions that didn't need straightening. "She's been working a lot lately," she said casually. "So I've noticed." "Have you?" She turned to face me, and there was something almost predatory in her smile. "Sometimes I wonder if you notice anything at all, Cedric. You're so trusting, so naive. Maybe I just choose to trust the people I love?" "And maybe," she said, moving closer, "that's exactly why they think they can walk all over you." The scent of her perfume filled the space between us, something expensive and cloying. She was standing close enough that I could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from her skin. "What are you trying to tell me, Vanna?" "I'm not trying to tell you anything," she said, reaching out to straighten my tie with fingers that lingered longer than necessary. "I'm just saying that some people mistake kindness for weakness, and some people need to learn that there are consequences for taking advantage of good men." Then she was gone, gliding up the stairs with the fluid grace of a cat. I stood alone in the living room, surrounded by the detritus of our life together. Family photos on the mantelpiece, Alma's yoga mat rolled up in the corner, a stack of her business magazines on the coffee table. All of it suddenly felt like evidence of a life I'd been living in ignorance. I waited until I heard the shower running upstairs before I made my move. Alma's laptop was in her home office, a converted bedroom that had become her private sanctuary over the past year. She'd started locking the door, claiming she needed privacy for client calls. I'd accepted that explanation, just like I'd accepted so many others. The password worked on the first try. Eli 2005. What I found in her email made my hands shake with rage I hadn't felt since I was a teenager getting picked on by bullies. Months of correspondence with someone named Blake Morrison. The messages started professionally enough. He was a colleague at her advertising firm, but quickly became personal. Then intimate, then explicit. "Can't wait for next weekend's conference in Chicago. Separate rooms for appearances, but you know where to find me. Tell Cedric you're working late again. I need you tonight. He's so clueless. Sometimes I think you could bring me home for dinner and he wouldn't notice." That last one hit like a physical blow. I sat back in her chair, staring at the screen, feeling something fundamental shift inside me. The man who had walked into this room 5 minutes ago had been naive, trusting, willing to give people the benefit of the doubt. The man sitting here now was someone different entirely. I copied the emails to a flash drive and cleared the browser history. Then I sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the sounds of my house. The shower had stopped running, footsteps moved across the bedroom floor above, a door closed softly. My phone buzzed. Another text from the same unknown number. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, but better to know than to keep living a lie. V." This time, I didn't delete the message. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray drizzle that made everything look washed out and depressing. Alma left for work early, claiming she had a breakfast meeting with a client. She kissed my cheek on her way out, the same perfunctory gesture she'd been giving me for months, and I had to resist the urge to wipe it away. "Have a good day," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "You too," she replied, already checking her phone as she headed for the garage. I waited until her car disappeared down the street before I allowed myself to feel anything. Rage, humiliation, a bone-deep exhaustion that had nothing to do with lack of sleep and everything to do with the effort of pretending everything was normal. Vanna appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing a silk robe that barely covered her thighs. Her hair was tousled from sleep, and she moved with the languid grace of someone who knew she was being watched. "Coffee?" she asked, already reaching for the pot. "Please." She poured 2 cups and handed me one, her fingers brushing mine in what might have been an accident. "You look terrible," she said, studying my face with those penetrating green eyes. "Rough night." "I imagine so." She leaned against the counter, cradling her mug in both hands. Did you find what you were looking for? I could have played dumb, pretended I didn't know what she was talking about, but I was tired of pretending. How long have you known? Months, she said simply. I tried to hint at it, but you're remarkably good at not seeing what you don't want to see. And you decided to help me out of the goodness of your heart? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. Goodness has nothing to do with it. Alma's always thought she was better than everyone else, smarter, more deserving. She needs to learn that actions have consequences. And what about me? What do I need to learn? Vanna set down her mug and moved closer, close enough that I could smell her shampoo, something floral and expensive. You need to learn that you deserve better than being treated like a convenience. You're a good man, Cedric. Too good for someone who sees you as nothing more than a paycheck and a babysitter. Is that what you think I am? I think, she said, reaching up to touch my face with fingers that were soft and warm, that you're wasted on my sister. I think you're the kind of man who deserves loyalty, respect, passion. For a moment, I let myself imagine what it would be like to lean into that touch, to let Vanna's obvious interest in me become something more. It would certainly be the easiest form of revenge. Fight fire with fire, betrayal with betrayal. But that would make me no better than Alma. I stepped back, gently removing her hand from my face. I appreciate the support, Vanna, but I need to handle this my own way. Something flickered in her eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or annoyance. But she covered it quickly with a smile. Of course. Just remember, you don't have to handle it alone. The rest of the day passed in a blur of client calls and routine maintenance tasks. I ran my IT consulting business from a small office downtown, nothing fancy, but it paid the bills and gave me the flexibility to set my own schedule. Today, that flexibility meant I could spend time researching Blake Morrison. He wasn't hard to find. The advertising world was small, and Blake had a healthy social media presence. 34 years old, recently divorced, the kind of guy who posted shirtless gym selfies and motivational quotes about living your best life. His LinkedIn profile showed he'd joined Alma's firm 6 months ago as a senior account executive. 6 months. Right around the time Alma had started working late and taking weekend business trips. I studied his photos with the detached interest of a scientist examining a specimen. He was handsome in a generic sort of way. Square jaw, perfect teeth, the kind of artificially enhanced physique that came from expensive personal trainers and protein supplements. Everything I wasn't, in other words. My phone rang, interrupting my research. Alma's name appeared on the screen. Hey, I said, proud of how normal I sounded. Hi, honey. Listen, I'm going to be late tonight. We're dealing with a crisis on the Henderson account, and I need to stay until we get it sorted out. How late? I don't know. Maybe 10? 11? Don't wait up. Okay, I said. I'll save you some dinner. You're sweet. I love you. The words hit like a slap. How could she say that to me when she was planning to spend the evening with another man? Love you too, I managed. After she hung up, I sat staring at my phone for a long time. Then I did something I'd never done before in 18 years of marriage. I called Alma's office. Morrison and Associates, the receptionist answered. Hi, this is Cedric Fallon. I'm trying to reach my wife, Alma Fallon, but she's not answering her cell. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Fallon. Ms. Fallon left about an hour ago. She said she had an off-site meeting with a client. I see, thank you. I hung up and sat back in my chair, feeling something cold and hard settle in my chest. So it was true. All of it. On the late nights, the weekend trips, the distance between us, it was all real, and it was all for Blake Morrison. That evening, I sat alone at our dining room table, picking at the dinner I'd made for two. Vanna had gone out with friends, or so she'd claimed. The house felt empty and hollow, like a stage set after the actors had gone home. Around 9 o'clock, I heard a car in the driveway. Alma's key turned in the lock, and she came in looking slightly disheveled, her lipstick gone, and her hair mussed. Hey, she said, hanging her purse on the hook by the door. Sorry I'm so late. The Henderson thing turned into a complete nightmare. I'm sure it did, I said mildly. How's Blake handling the crisis? She froze, her hand still on her purse strap. Blake? Blake Morrison, your colleague. I assume he's helping with the Henderson account? Oh, yes, of course. She turned away, busying herself with hanging up her coat. He's been very helpful. I bet he has. She shot me a sharp look. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing, I said, standing up from the table. Just making conversation. I'm going to bed. I left her standing in the hallway, looking confused and slightly panicked. Good. Let her wonder what I knew and how much. Let her spend the night lying awake, trying to figure out if her perfect little secret was still safe. because it wasn't, and neither was she. Upstairs, I lay in bed listening to her move around the house, getting ready for bed with the same routine she'd followed for years. Washing her face, brushing her teeth, changing into the conservative pajamas she wore at home, so different from whatever she wore for Blake. When she finally slipped into bed beside me, I pretended to be asleep. She lay there for a long time, tense and wakeful, before finally drifting off. But I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling and planning. Because Vanna was right about one thing. Actions did have consequences, and Alma was about to learn exactly what those consequences looked like. The next morning brought clarity along with the sunrise. I knew what I had to do, and more importantly, I knew how to do it. Alma thought she was so clever, so careful. She thought I was too trusting, too naive, too comfortable to ever challenge her. She was about to discover just how wrong she could be. Tuesday morning, Alma left for work with the same casual kiss on the cheek, the same distracted air of someone whose mind was already elsewhere. But this time, I was ready for her. I'd spent the sleepless hours before dawn planning my approach. Revenge, I'd realized, was like any other project. It required careful planning, attention to detail, and flawless execution. Lucky for me, those were skills I'd honed over years of managing complex IT implementations. My first stop was Blake Morrison's apartment complex, a trendy development downtown that catered to young professionals with more money than sense. I'd found his address through a simple property record search. Amazing what you could discover when you knew where to look. His BMW was parked in spot 247, gleaming silver under the morning sun. The kind of car that screamed, "Look at me," to anyone within a 50-foot radius. I parked across the street and waited, sipping coffee from a travel mug and watching the building's entrance. At 8:30, Blake emerged, checking his phone as he walked. He was exactly what I'd expected from his photos. Tall, artificially tanned, wearing a suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. The kind of man who'd never had to work for anything in his life, who took what he wanted because he'd never learned there might be consequences. He was about to get his first lesson. I waited until he drove away before making my move. The apartment complex had security cameras, but they were positioned to watch the entrances, not the parking garage. I'd learned that from a casual conversation with the building manager, who'd been happy to chat about their security measures when I'd posed as a potential tenant the day before. Blake's BMW sat in its assigned spot like a monument to arrogance. I walked past it once, twice, making sure no one was watching. Then I pulled out my keys and dragged them along the driver's side door, leaving a long, deep scratch in the pristine paint. It wasn't much, but it was a start. A message that someone was paying attention, that his perfect little life wasn't as secure as he thought. I left a note under his windshield wiper. Stay away from what doesn't belong to you. By the time I got home, Vanna was up and dressed, looking stunning in a way that seemed effortless but probably took an hour to achieve. She was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone with a cup of coffee at her elbow. "You're up early," she said without looking up. "Couldn't sleep." "Guilty conscience?" She glanced at me with those knowing green eyes. "Or just planning your next move?" "What makes you think I'm planning anything?" She laughed, a sound like silver bells with a sharp edge. "Because you're not the same man you were 3 days ago. There's something different about you, something harder." She wasn't wrong. I could feel the change in myself, like a snake shedding its skin. The naive, trusting husband was gone, replaced by someone I didn't entirely recognize but was beginning to like. Maybe I'm just tired of being taken for granted. "Good," she said, standing up and moving closer. "It's about time. Alma's been walking all over you for years, and you've just taken it, but you don't have to anymore." "And what do you suggest I do about it?" Vanna smiled, and there was something predatory in the expression. "I suggest you stop playing defense and start playing offense. Make her sweat. Make her wonder. Make her realize what she's throwing away." "Is that what you did with your ex-husband?" The smile faltered for just a moment. "My ex-husband was a different kind of problem. He was weak, pathetic. You're not weak, Cedric. You're just dormant. But you're waking up now, aren't you?" She was right, and we both knew it. The man who'd scratched Blake's car that morning wasn't someone I would have recognized a week ago, but he felt more real, more authentic than the doormat I'd been pretending to be. My phone buzzed with a text from Alma. "Working late again tonight? Don't wait up." I showed the message to Vanna, who snorted with disgust. She's not even trying to be creative about it anymore. How many late nights can one advertising account require? Apparently, as many as it takes. "You know where she's really going, don't you?" I nodded. I'd done my research. Blake lived alone in that trendy apartment complex. Alma's phone GPS, which she'd never bothered to turn off, would show exactly where she spent her evenings, but I didn't need technology to confirm what I already knew in my gut. "What are you going to do about it?" Vanna asked. "I'm working on it." That afternoon, I drove to Alma's office building. It was a sleek glass tower downtown, the kind of place that housed law firms and consulting companies and advertising agencies that charged premium rates for mediocre work. I'd been there before, for company parties and client events, but never as a man on a mission. I parked across the street and waited. At 5:30, employees began streaming out of the building. I spotted Alma easily. She was wearing a red dress I'd never seen before, something that hugged her curves and made her look younger than her 41 years. She was walking with Blake, their heads close together in intimate conversation. They got into his BMW, the one with the fresh scratch down the side, and drove away. I followed at a distance, not because I needed to know where they were going, but because I wanted to see them together. I wanted to fuel the anger that was growing inside me like a living thing. They went to a restaurant on the other side of town, the kind of place with dim lighting and private booths where married women could dine with men who weren't their husbands. I watched them through the window, saw the way she laughed at his jokes, the way she leaned across the table to touch his hand. She looked happy, happier than I'd seen her in months. That night she came home at 11:30, reeking of wine and wearing that same satisfied smile I remembered from our early days together. She slipped into bed beside me, and when she thought I was asleep, she reached for her phone and typed a quick message. I couldn't see what she wrote, but I could guess. The next morning, I was ready for phase 2 of my plan. While Alma was in the shower, I used her laptop to access her email account. I forwarded the most damaging messages between her and Blake to my own email address, then deleted the sent items so she wouldn't know what I'd done. Insurance, I told myself. Evidence for later. But even as I gathered ammunition for whatever war was coming, part of me hoped she would stop. Come clean. Choose our marriage over her midlife crisis with a man young enough to be her younger brother. She didn't, of course. That evening brought another late meeting, another lie delivered with the same casual indifference she might use to discuss the weather, so I escalated. Blake's gym was called Elite Fitness, one of those expensive places where people went to be seen as much as to work out. I'd found it through his social media posts. Apparently he was very proud of his workout routine and wanted the world to know about it. I joined on a day pass, claiming I was thinking about switching from my current gym. The staff was happy to give me a tour, show me the facilities, introduce me to potential trainers. All I had to do was keep my eyes open and wait for Blake to show up. He arrived at 6 p.m. sharp, wearing designer workout clothes and an expression of supreme self-satisfaction. I watched him from across the weight room as he went through his routine, bench press, bicep curls, endless selfies in the mirror. Everything about him screamed vanity and self-absorption. Perfect. I waited until he went to the locker room, then made my move. His gym bag was sitting on a bench, unattended and unzipped. It took me 30 seconds to slip a note inside. "I know what you're doing with Alma Fallon. It needs to stop." Not subtle, but effective. Let him wonder who knew, how much they knew, and what they planned to do about it. When I got home, Vanna was waiting in the living room, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine and a knowing smile. "You look pleased with yourself," she said. "Do I?" "Like a cat who's been at the cream. What did you do?" I told her about the note, and her smile widened. Brilliant. Nothing like a little psychological pressure to make someone paranoid. He'll be looking over his shoulder for weeks, wondering who's watching him. "The goal isn't to make him paranoid," I said. "It's to make him back off. And if he doesn't, then I escalate again." Vanna laughed, raising her wine glass in a mock toast. "Here's to escalation, then, and to my sister finally getting what she deserves." I didn't drink to that toast, but I didn't disagree with it either. Because Vanna was right about one thing. Alma did deserve consequences for her choices, and I was just the man to give them to her. The note in Blake's gym bag had the desired effect. Over the next few days, Alma became increasingly agitated, jumping every time her phone rang and checking her messages with the frantic intensity of someone expecting bad news. "Everything okay?" I asked over breakfast on Friday morning, keeping my tone carefully neutral. "Fine," she snapped, then immediately softened her voice. "Sorry, just work stress. The Henderson account is really demanding." "Maybe you should take a break from all those late meetings," I suggested. "You seem exhausted." She shot me a sharp look, as if trying to determine whether there was hidden meaning in my words. "I can't just abandon my responsibilities, Cedric. Some of us have demanding careers." The implication stung, as it was meant to. My IT consulting business might not have the glamour of advertising, but it paid well and gave me the freedom to be present for our family. Or it had, back when we'd still been a family. Of course, I said mildly. I wouldn't want you to compromise your professional integrity. That afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. When I answered, Blake Morrison's voice came through the speaker, tight with barely controlled anger. Is this Cedric Fallon? Speaking. We need to talk. Do we? About what? You know exactly what. Meet me at Murphy's Bar on 5th Street. 1 hour. He hung up before I could respond. I stared at the phone for a moment, then smiled. Phase 3 was beginning ahead of schedule. Murphy's Bar was the kind of place where blue-collar workers went to forget their troubles and white-collar types went to pretend they were still connected to their roots. It was neutral territory, public enough to prevent anything too dramatic, but private enough for a serious conversation. Blake was already there when I arrived, nursing a beer at a corner table and looking like a man who'd rather be anywhere else. Up close, he was even more artificial than his photos suggested. 2 white teeth, 2 perfect hair, the kind of tan that came from expensive treatments rather than honest sunlight. Cedric Fallon, I said, extending my hand as I approached the table. Nice to finally meet you. He didn't shake my hand. Cut the act. You know why I called. Actually, I don't. I sat down across from him and signaled the bartender for a beer. But I'm curious to find out. The notes, the vandalism, the harassment. It stops now. I'm sorry, but I think you have me confused with someone else. What notes? His jaw tightened. Don't play games with me. I know you know about Alma and me. There it was, the admission I'd been waiting for. I leaned back in my chair and studied his face, taking my time before responding. Do I? Look, I get it. You're angry. But this isn't the way to handle it. What would you suggest instead? Be a man about it. Talk to your wife. Work it out between you. Leave me out of it. I laughed, and the sound made him flinch. Be a man about it. That's rich, coming from someone who's been sneaking around with another man's wife for months. Alma's not happy, he said, leaning forward with the earnest expression of someone who actually believed his own justifications. She hasn't been happy for years. You've neglected her, taken her for granted. I'm giving her what she needs. And what's that exactly? Attention, appreciation, passion. When was the last time you made her feel desired? When was the last time you really looked at her, saw her as a woman instead of just a wife? The questions hit harder than I expected, mainly because there was truth in them. I had taken Alma for granted, had fallen into the comfortable routine of long marriage without thinking about whether comfort was enough. But that didn't excuse what she'd done, what they'd both done. You're right, I said, surprising him. I haven't been the perfect husband, but you know what I also haven't been. A cheater, a liar, a man who destroys families for his own gratification. I'm not destroying anything that wasn't already broken. Tell yourself whatever helps you sleep at night. But here's what's going to happen. You're going to end it with Alma, tonight. You're going to tell her it was a mistake, that you've realized it can't continue, and you're going to transfer to a different department or find a new job entirely. He stared at me for a long moment, then burst out laughing. Or what? You'll key my car again? Leave more threatening notes? Face it, Fallon. You're not cut out for this kind of confrontation. You're a middle-aged IT guy with a beer gut and a receding hairline. What are you going to do to me? The insults rolled off me like water. I'd heard variations of them my whole life, from schoolyard bullies to corporate executives who thought they were better than the people who kept their systems running. But this time was different. This time, I had nothing left to lose. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone, setting it on the table between us. I'm going to show everyone at your office exactly what kind of man you are, starting with these. I opened the email folder where I'd saved Alma's correspondence with Blake and began scrolling through the messages. His face went white as he read the explicit details of their affair, the casual cruelty of their jokes about me, the planning of their secret meetings. How did you get those? Does it matter? What matters is what I do with them. Your boss might find them interesting. HR would definitely want to see them. Company policy on workplace relationships is pretty clear, isn't it? And I'm sure your ex-wife's divorce attorney would love to have copies for the alimony hearing. Blake's hands were shaking as he reached for his beer. You can't do this. It's blackmail. It's consequences. Something you've apparently never had to deal with before. What do you want? I told you. End it with Alma, tonight. Make it clear that it's over and it's never going to happen again. Do that, and these emails stay between us. And if I don't? I smiled, and for the first time in the conversation, I saw real fear in his eyes. Then you'll find out exactly what a middle-aged IT guy with nothing left to lose is capable of. I finished my beer and stood up, leaving money on the table for both drinks. You have until midnight to make your choice. Choose wisely. As I walked away, I could feel his eyes burning into my back. But I didn't turn around. The old Cedric would have second-guessed himself, would have worried about whether he was doing the right thing. The new Cedric didn't care about right and wrong anymore. He cared about winning. That evening, Alma came home early for the first time in weeks. She was quiet during dinner, picking at her food and checking her phone obsessively. When it finally rang at 9 o'clock, she answered it in the kitchen, her voice too low for me to hear the words, but not the tone. Desperate, pleading, confused. The call lasted 20 minutes. When she came back to the living room, her eyes were red and her hands were shaking. "Everything okay?" I asked, not looking up from the book I was pretending to read. "Fine," she said, but her voice cracked on the word. I waited until she'd gone upstairs before allowing myself to smile. Blake had made his choice, and apparently it was the smart one. But this was just the beginning. Ending the affair was only the first step in a much larger plan. Because Alma needed to understand that actions had consequences, that betraying the people who loved you came with a price. And I was just getting started collecting payment. The next 2 weeks passed in a strange sort of limbo. Alma's late-night meetings stopped abruptly, replaced by evenings spent at home, staring at her phone and waiting for calls that never came. She tried to return to our old routines, but there was a desperate quality to her efforts, like someone trying to rebuild a house on a foundation that had already cracked. "Maybe we should plan a vacation," she suggested one evening over dinner. "Just the two of us. We could go to that bed and breakfast in Vermont you mentioned last year." "That sounds nice," I said, though we both knew it wasn't going to happen. Vanna watched these interactions with barely concealed amusement, like someone enjoying a particularly entertaining television show. She'd taken to making subtle comments designed to increase Alma's paranoia, mentioning how quiet the neighborhood had been lately, how nice it was when families spent time together, how important trust was in a marriage. "You seem tense lately, sis," she said one morning over breakfast. "Everything okay at work?" "Everything's fine," Alma replied, but her knuckles were white where she gripped her coffee mug. "Good. I'd hate to think someone was causing problems for you. You know how protective I can be of family." The irony wasn't lost on any of us, but ending Blake's affair with my wife was only the first phase of my plan. The real work was just beginning. I'd spent years building my IT consulting business, cultivating relationships with clients who trusted me with their most sensitive data. That network of trust was about to become a weapon. Alma worked for Morrison and Associates, a mid-sized advertising firm that handled accounts for several of my clients. It wasn't hard to arrange a meeting with their IT director under the pretense of discussing security upgrades. What I learned during that meeting was even more interesting than I'd hoped. The company was already struggling with internal politics and declining revenues. Several major clients had recently jumped ship, citing concerns about the firm's direction and leadership. Morale was low, and there were rumors of layoffs coming before the end of the quarter. In other words, it was the perfect environment for a little strategic sabotage. I started small. A few carefully placed comments to mutual acquaintances about Morrison and Associates' outdated security protocols. Casual mentions of their high employee turnover rate during networking events. Nothing actionable, nothing that could be traced back to me, but enough to plant seeds of doubt in potential clients' minds. Then I escalated. One of my biggest clients was considering switching advertising agencies. When they asked for my recommendation, I made sure to mention several firms, all of them competitors of Morrison and Associates. I didn't badmouth Alma's company directly, I simply failed to mention them as an option. The contract was worth $500,000 annually. Losing it wouldn't destroy Morrison and Associates, but it would hurt. And in a business where reputation was everything, even small wounds could become infected. But my real masterpiece was yet to come. Blake Morrison might have ended his affair with my wife, but he was still working at the same company, still seeing her every day, still serving as a reminder of her betrayal. That needed to change. I'd kept copies of their email correspondence, of course, but I'd also done deeper research into Blake's background, his employment history, his personal life. What I found was a pattern of behavior that went far beyond his relationship with Alma. Blake Morrison was a predator, not in the criminal sense, but in the way he targeted vulnerable women, recent divorcees, lonely wives, female colleagues going through difficult times. He was careful never to cross legal lines, but his methods were consistent. Identify weakness, exploit it, then move on when he got bored or the situation became complicated. Alma wasn't his first married conquest, and she wouldn't have been his last. Armed with this information, I crafted an anonymous email to Morrison and Associates' HR department. I didn't mention Alma specifically. That would have been too obvious. Instead, I focused on Blake's pattern of behavior, his inappropriate relationships with colleagues, his history of creating hostile work environments for women who rejected his advances. I included enough specific details to make the allegations credible, but not so many that they could be traced back to me. Then I sent copies to several other employees at the firm, people who would be in a position to corroborate the story or add their own experiences. The response was swift and decisive. Blake was suspended pending investigation, then quietly terminated when the company realized they couldn't afford the liability he represented. He was gone within a week, his desk cleaned out, and his access revoked. Alma came home that Friday evening looking shell-shocked. "Blake's been fired," she announced without preamble. "Really? What happened?" "HR won't say. Some kind of personnel issue. He's just gone." I made appropriate sympathetic noises while internally celebrating. One problem solved, but the larger issue remained. Alma had betrayed our marriage, and simply removing her partner in that betrayal wasn't enough. She needed to understand the full cost of her choices. "I'm sure he'll land on his feet," I said. "Men like Blake always do." She shot me a sharp look. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just that he seems like the type who's good at taking care of himself." That weekend, I implemented the final phase of my plan. Eli was home from a friend's house, and for the first time in weeks, we had something approaching a normal family dinner. Alma tried to maintain the pretense of normalcy, asking about school and friends and weekend plans. But there was a brittleness to her performance, like an actress who'd forgotten her lines. "Dad," Eli said as we were clearing the table, "can I talk to you about something?" "Of course." We went out to the back patio, away from Alma and Vanna. The evening air was crisp with the promise of autumn, and the smell of someone's barbecue drifted over from the next yard. "Is everything okay with you and Mom?" he asked without preamble. "You guys seem different lately." I looked at my son, 17 years old, smart enough to sense the tension, but young enough to hope it could be fixed. He had Alma's eyes, but my stubborn chin, and seeing him standing there in the fading light made my chest tight with emotions I wasn't ready to examine. "We're working through some things," I said carefully. "Are you getting divorced?" The question hung in the air between us like a challenge. I could lie, tell him everything was fine, maintain the facade for a little while longer, or I could tell him the truth and watch his world crumble. "I don't know," I said finally. "Maybe." He nodded slowly, as if he'd been expecting that answer. "Is it because of Mom's boyfriend?" The words hit me like a physical blow. "What do you know about that?" "I'm not stupid, Dad. The late meetings, the new clothes, the way she's been acting. Plus, Aunt Vanna's been dropping hints for weeks." Of course she had. Vanna was playing her own game, using Eli as another weapon in her war against her sister. "I'm sorry you had to find out that way," I said. "What are you going to do?" "What do you think I should do?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the darkening sky. "I think," he said finally, "that you deserve better than someone who lies to you." Out of the mouths of babes. That night, after Eli had gone to bed and Vanna had retreated to her room, I found Alma in our bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with her head in her hands. "We need to talk," I said. She looked up at me with eyes that were red from crying. "I know." "Do you? Do you really know what this conversation is about?" "Blake told me you threatened him, that you have our emails." "And?" "And I know you know about the affair." I sat down across from her, maintaining the distance that had grown between us over the past months. "How long? 6 months? Maybe 7? Why?" She was quiet for so long I thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I felt invisible. Because you stopped seeing me as anything other than a wife and mother. Because Blake made me feel young and desirable and alive again." "So this is my fault?" "No." "Yes." "I don't know." She looked up at me with desperate eyes. "I made a mistake, Cedric. A terrible mistake. But it's over now. Blake's gone, and I want to fix this. I want to fix us." "Do you? Or do you just want to avoid the consequences of what you've done?" "Both," she said, and I had to admire her honesty. "I love you. I know that sounds impossible after what I've done, but I do. I love our life together, our family, everything we've built. I don't want to lose it. You should have thought of that before you decided to rebuild it with someone else." She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "What do you want me to do? How do I fix this?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the suburban street where we'd lived for the past 15 years. Normal houses filled with normal families dealing with normal problems. We'd been normal once, too. "I don't think you can," I said without turning around. "Cedric, please. We can go to counseling. We can work through this. People survive affairs all the time." "Some people do, but those people usually have something left to save." When I turned back to face her, she was crying again. "What does that mean?" It means that trust, once broken, can't be repaired. It can be replaced with something else: vigilance, resignation, mutual convenience, but it can't be fixed, and without trust, what's the point? The point is that we love each other. The point is 18 years of marriage and a son and a life together. The point, I said, is that you threw all of that away for 6 months of excitement with a man who didn't even have the courage to fight for you when things got complicated. The harshness of the words surprised even me, but they were true. Blake had left her the moment real consequences appeared, proving that whatever they'd shared was built on nothing more solid than mutual selfishness and brief attraction. "I know," she whispered. "I know I was stupid. I know I was selfish. But people make mistakes, Cedric. Even good people make terrible mistakes." "Yes, they do, and then they live with the consequences." I walked toward the door, then paused. "I'll be sleeping in the guest room from now on. We'll figure out the rest later." "Cedric, wait." But I was already gone, leaving her alone with the wreckage of the life she'd chosen to destroy. In the hallway, I found Vanna waiting, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed and a satisfied smile on her face. "Feel better?" she asked. "No," I said, "but it's a start." And it was, because this wasn't about feeling better. This was about justice. This was about making sure that actions had consequences, that people who betrayed the ones who loved them didn't get to simply apologize their way back to comfort and security. Alma had made her choice. Now she was going to live with it. A week later, after a quiet meeting with a divorce attorney and a long, brutally honest talk with Eli, I agreed to one last performance. Sunday dinner at my in-laws. Vanna helped me plan it with the precision of a military operation. What to say, what not to say, when to walk away. "You don't need to scream," she told me. "You just need to stop protecting her." For the first time in months, I realized revenge didn't have to be loud to be devastating. It just had to be clear. The crystal chandelier over Harold and Patricia's dining table looked exactly as it had that first night, throwing glittering light over polished silver and expensive china. Alma arrived without her wedding ring yet again, bare finger flashing every time she lifted her wine glass. Patricia patted the chair beside Alma, the dutiful husband spot I'd occupied for 18 years. Instead, I walked around the table and pulled out the chair next to Vanna, leaving an obvious empty space at my wife's side. The scrape of the chair on hardwood sounded like a verdict. Conversation stumbled back into motion, but the air felt thin and brittle. Alma kept glancing at the empty chair beside her like it might fill itself if she wished hard enough. Vanna leaned in close to me, her hand resting lightly on my forearm, and pitched her voice just loud enough to carry. "Ready?" she murmured. Across the table, Alma's face drained of color. She knew exactly how much her sister knew, and how little control she had left. Vanna lifted her glass. To family," she said sweetly, "and to finally being honest with the people we claim to love." On cue, I reached into my jacket, took out my wedding ring, and set it gently in the center of my plate. "Alma hasn't worn hers in weeks," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational. Turns out she took it off for a colleague named Blake. I thought everyone deserved to know why I won't be sitting beside her anymore, at this table or in this marriage. The silence that followed was louder than any shouting match we'd ever had. Patricia gasped. Harold stared at his daughter like he'd never seen her before. Alma started to protest, half-formed excuses about stress and mistakes and midlife confusion, but I was already pushing back my chair. "You can explain it however you like," I said, standing. "To them, to HR, to whoever ends up reading those emails when the lawyers get involved. But I'm done explaining away your choices for you." I thanked Harold and Patricia for dinner, kissed Eli on the top of his stunned head, and walked toward the door without looking back. On the driveway, the cool evening air felt cleaner than it had in years. Behind me, I heard voices rising, chairs scraping, the sound of a life collapsing under its own lies. Beside me, Vanna slipped her hands into her coat pockets and gave a low whistle. "Well," she said, "that's one way to put the ring back on the table." I smiled, not at her, not at the chaos behind us, but at the sudden, unfamiliar lightness in my chest. Alma had taken off her wedding ring and thought it made her free. All it had really done was give me permission to finally walk away.